They say the old Whitmore house was cursed the moment the paint touched the walls. In 1910, it was built with grand ambitions by Charles Whitmore, a man of influence in the quiet town of Maple Hollow. But for reasons long buried with time, Whitmore's legacy became known for something else entirely: unexplainable, eerie events. Many years had passed since anyone dared to live there. The townsfolk were convinced the house itself was breathing. Some swore it whispered. Then came Evelyn Barrett, a retired schoolteacher with a love for restoring old homes, who dismissed the warnings as folklore. From her very first night, strange things started happening. A soft, unrelenting tap, tap, tap echoed from the attic. At first, Evelyn thought it was just the old structure settling into her presence. But the sounds became a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. Each night, that heartbeat grew louder, as if something was trying to reach out from beyond the walls. On her second night in the house, Evelyn tried to convince herself that the persistent tapping was just the old building settling. She was determined not to let her imagination get the better of her. But at the edge of her consciousness, she couldn't shake the feeling that the sound was less random and more deliberate. The tapping seemed to grow louder, and Evelyn heard the faintest sound of a woman crying, echoing down the halls, drawing her toward the attic door. That morning, she decided to explore the attic, the origin of the mysterious sounds. She dragged a stepladder from the closet and, with an old key she'd found in the kitchen drawer, unlocked the attic door. The hinges groaned as she pushed it open, revealing a dark, dusty space filled with old trunks and furniture draped in heavy cloth. She felt an uninviting chill that had nothing to do with the autumn weather outside. As she moved further inside, her flashlight illuminated a small, framed photograph on an old chest. The image was of Charles Whitmore, the house's original owner. Next to him stood a woman whose face was worn with sorrow. Evelyn's gaze fixed on the woman's eyes. They seemed almost to plead, as if begging for release. That evening, Evelyn sat by the fireplace, holding the photograph she'd found. Her fingers brushed over the frame, and a tiny silver locket fell out from behind the picture, landing softly on her lap. Inside, a tiny inscription read, "To my beloved Clara, forever yours, Charles." A chill ran down her spine as she realized this locket must have belonged to the woman in the photograph. The eerie whispers began again that night, clearer than before. She heard the faintest sound of a woman crying, echoing down the halls, drawing her toward the attic door. As she climbed, the sobbing grew louder. With trembling hands, she opened the attic door, and this time, the room was different. It looked as though it hadn't aged a day, with Clara's personal belongings strewn about as if she'd just left. And then Evelyn saw her, a faint outline of a woman, standing by the window, gazing out into the moonlit garden. Her silhouette was barely there, but the sorrow radiating from her was almost tangible. Evelyn took a step forward, her voice wavering. "Clara?" The figure slowly turned, her face half obscured by shadows, and in a voice that seemed to come from 1,000 miles away, she whispered, "Find me." The next morning, Evelyn couldn't resist any longer. Armed with a small shovel, she returned to the spot in the garden where she'd found the brass key. She began to dig, her hands trembling with each scoop of earth. Soon, her shovel hit something hard, a wooden box, its surface rotting from years underground. Evelyn carefully lifted it out and pried it open. Inside were letters, brittle with age, and a leather-bound journal. As she thumbed through the journal, she realized it was Clara's. The pages revealed her sorrow over a forbidden romance, her heartbreak, and ultimately, the growing fear that Charles had discovered her secret. But then, Evelyn's hands froze as she read Clara's final entry. "He will not let me leave. He says my soul belongs to him now, that I must remain here, forever." Evelyn's heart pounded. She could feel Clara's despair seeping through the words, as if her very spirit was woven into the ink on the page. As Evelyn looked back toward the house, she saw a figure standing at the window, watching her. It was Charles, or something that had taken on his form. His hollow eyes seemed to burn with rage, a warning she felt in her bones. Over the following nights, Evelyn grew weaker. It was as if something was sapping her energy, feeding off her fear. She tried to leave Whitmore House, but each time she attempted to cross the threshold, an invisible force would pull her back, leaving her breathless and shaken. It was clear now, Charles's spirit had no intention of letting her go. Desperate, Evelyn decided to confront the spirit directly. She returned to the attic, clutching Clara's journal in one hand and the locket in the other. She called out, her voice echoing off the walls, "Charles, I know what you did to her. Release her spirit, and let me leave this place." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Then, the air grew frigid, and Charles's apparition appeared before her, his face twisted with malice. His voice was a low growl. "I gave Clara my love, my life. If she couldn't be mine, then no one else would have her." He looked at Evelyn with a chilling grin. "And now you will share her fate." But Evelyn held up the locket, its glinting surface catching his gaze. She whispered, "This was her heart, Charles. You may have bound her to you, but this was her heart, and it wants to be free." At that, the ghostly figure flinched, retreating into the shadows. The locket seemed to glow faintly in Evelyn's hand, a beacon in the darkness. As dawn broke, Evelyn felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over her. The heavy presence that had loomed in the house had lifted, and the air was calm. Clara's figure stood by the window one last time, her face no longer shrouded in sorrow but filled with gratitude. With a soft smile, Clara spoke, her voice as gentle as the morning breeze. "Thank you, Evelyn. You have given me peace." And with that, her form dissolved into the first rays of sunlight, her spirit finally freed from Whitmore House. Evelyn left the house that morning, the oppressive feeling finally lifted. She knew she'd never return, but as she walked away, she felt Clara's presence beside her, a lasting friendship born from a tragedy long past.